content yourself and share it with your networks. Please ensure your video camera and microphone are muted during the workshop. This will help eliminate ambient noise and increase clarity. We invite your comments and questions, and the bulk of the workshop will be in a question and answer format using the chat box. And we'll also, at that time, we'll be unmuting everyone, so it can be sort of an open forum as well. The chat box button is the 6th button from the left at the bottom of your screen. Once you click it, the chat box will appear on the right-hand side of your screen. If you think of a question at any point, just type it in the chat box and I will pose it during the Q&A portion. You could choose to ask the question anonymously by sending the message to the host as opposed to everyone in the chat box. An evaluation will be emailed to you later. It will take about 5 minutes to complete. Please don't include your name on this form in order to remain anonymous. The information you provide will be kept confidential and private. Only authorized individuals at CCMW will have access. If you require technological assistance, please send Zainab a direct message using the chat box to the host or text Zainab at 647-877-2994. So I'm going to now move on to providing you with some information about the organization and our vision and mission. So the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, CCMW, is a national nonprofit organization committed to attaining equality, equity, and empowerment for all Muslim women in Canada. Founded in 1982, the organization works to promote Muslim women's identity in the Canadian context. For more than 37 years, CCMW has proudly advocated on behalf of Muslim women and their families and has developed national projects that enrich the identity of Canadian Muslims, encourage civic engagement, and empower communities. So now I'm just going to go over some work that we've done in the past and more recently. So some of the work that we have done in the past and more recently include the following. In 2003, CCMW took a lead in establishing a coalition against religious arbitration, composed of over 50 organizations, 50 sister organizations, including the National Association of Women in the Law, METRAC, and the YWCA. The No Religious Arbitration Movement and CCMW's work represented an array of complex issues and events. CCMW advocated for one set of laws to be applied to all, regardless of faith, ethnicity, race, or culture, under the existing family law legislation. We were successful in that the Government of Ontario made a decision to disallow the use of religious family laws under the Provisions Arbitration Act. Most recently, CCMW started the Digital Anti-Racism Education Campaign. The aim of this project was to raise awareness about online hate and Islamophobia by empowering racialized women, girls, and allies with resources and tools to counter hate online to delete racism. So that's a little bit about the organization, and now let's get started. So I'm Waiza Afzal, and also on the call with me is Zara Hojati, and we are board members on the CCMW Toronto chapter, and we'll be the 2 facilitators for today. Soumia Allalou is our in-house lawyer for today and has kindly offered her time to us. So just a little bit about us. Zara received her doctoral degree in higher education and women and gender studies at OAZ at the University of Toronto. Her research interest is using an anti-colonial and integrative anti-racist feminist perspective to challenge the integration of capitalism and patriarchy. My background is in public policy and government and stakeholder relations. Soumia, our lawyer for today, has dual degrees in both common law and civil law from McGill University's Faculty of Law. She has appeared before both the Ontario Court of Justice and the Ontario Superior Court of Justice and focuses her practice in the areas of criminal defense, family, and civil litigation. We really want this workshop to be interactive and are especially excited to hear your perspectives and thoughts on Canadian Muslim women's legal rights. So your participation during the Q&A is greatly appreciated. Zainab from the national chapter of CCMW will be, so I'll actually be reading out the questions during the Q&A, which will form the bulk of the workshop. So let me first begin by giving you some context about this workshop. The workshop will reflect the contents in 6 brochures produced by CCMW that provides comparative information about Canadian and Muslim family law as it relates to women's rights. The topics covered in those brochures, as you'll see on the screen, are marriage, divorce, custody and child support, family, property and spousal support, domestic contracts, and inheritance. So if we can just go to the next slide. The content of these resources is based on Muslim and Canadian Family Laws, a Comparative Primer, published by CCMW. Next slide, please. The goal of this workshop is to support Canadian Muslim women make informed choices in the area of family law in Canada. We hope these resources will be of assistance to professionals who work with Muslim women in the family court system, students who would like to know more about these issues, community-based service providers, as well as women in general. Next slide, please. Please note that the information contained in this workshop is just that, information. It is not legal advice and should not be interpreted as such. If you or someone you know is dealing with a family law issue, it is important to meet with a lawyer to discuss the situation and to receive legal advice. The workshop and the brochures are not a replacement for legal advice. If you would like to find out about Muslim laws and legal opinions, you should consult Muslim and Canadian Family Laws, a comparative primer. For this workshop, we'll primarily be focusing on Canadian family law. Also, something to bear in mind, laws in a public legal system are in a constant state of flux as they are changed to adapt to the times. What you hear in this workshop and what you read in the brochures is accurate to the date of publication. You are encouraged to verify that the information contained in the documents about Canadian laws is current to the time you are reading or hearing it. Okay, next slide, please. So let's just quickly go over the agenda in terms of the content for today. So we're going to begin this workshop by providing a brief overview of Muslim law, and that will be covered by Zahra. We'll then provide an overview of Canadian law and its applicability, which will be covered by Soumia. Then we'll share a video with a scenario and we'll pose discussion questions to you in relation to the scenario as it relates to the 6 topics mentioned above: marriage, divorce, custody, child support, family property and spousal support, domestic contracts and inheritance. We really, and I'll reiterate this again, we really want this workshop to be a safe space to discuss answers, and we really want this workshop to be interactive. And any questions related to Canadian law will be addressed to Soumia. So I'll now pass it over to Zahra, who will be giving you a brief overview of Muslim law.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy that can you hear me? Yeah, I am positive that there is no problem in hearing me. I'm so happy.
There's an individual who.
Soumia, did you say anything? Can you hear me clearly?
I just mentioned there's an individual who said they're having issues hearing.
Okay. Okay, great. Actually, I'm so happy personally that finally with Baiza we could have
Zainab, if for the person who is having trouble hearing, if you can just send a message to the host and maybe we can try to get that addressed.
Can I continue?
Yes, and let's continue.
Okay. The topic that I'm covering in very short brief is Muslim law and Sharia, and I'm so positive that most of you know and aware of that. But in here, we just refresh our mind and be coherent with the CCMW strategic thinking. Actually, we can use Sharia and Islamic law. We can say that they are interchangeable words. Some use Sharia and some use Islamic law. So I prefer in this time go to the next slide and then again come back to this slide, please. Hello? Hello? Yeah. In definition, please. Definition. Sorry, definition, yeah. In definition, when we talk about the definition of Sharia, what is the Sharia? Literally, Sharia means the path to the water. And this water is the divine words, that is ideal way of living for Muslims. And so, because it is ideal for Muslim, because the essence of Quran sees both women and men in from the same nafs, from the same creation. So there is no discrimination or privilege from one gender over the other genders. And so when we talk about the fiqh is something that is man-made. It means that fiqh, it literally means knowledge about how you should rule the community. The body of Muslim community is ruled by the faqih, or the fiqh that they understand, and they analyze how they can use the other sources to imply over Muslim community. So it is why that we may name it this man-made. So please come back again to the previous slide. Yes, no, the previous slide, please, the first one. Yeah, and so there are many sources that the fiqh or jurists they use as ruling the community. The first one is Quran. Quran is a divine word that is all of us know that this comes in 7th century. But after the centuries, the Sunnah and Hadith came from the Prophet's action. For example, when we talk about the Sunnah, it means the Prophet, what prophets did and behave, we call it as a Sunnah, and Hadith is whatever that he said. So the collection of those documents is profiled and documented and text in 9th and 10th century. So it means that after the centuries, those documents is established. So jurists and legal authority, they use the Quran, they use the second one from the Sunnah and Hadith, and they also use their own agreement in terms of any issue. For example, it is why that they call it consensus of the community. It means that they have the agreement, and in Islamic word, they call it ijma. And the other source that they use in analogical reasoning, it means that they use their own reason. They extract an ayat or understand something from Quran and expand it to other issues. In interpretation slide, I will explain it much more. So by these different sources, you can see that Islamic jurists, they want to use all those sources to rule the community. But we have two main sects. For example, sects of Sunni and Shia. And Shia, which themselves, they are also different school of thought, different madhab that they are using. For example, all of you knows that there are the four main branch that they practice. It's Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. And why we have this diversification? Because their interpretation is it's different. Maybe there are also some overlap, but it's different. So it is why that we have diversification among Sunni as well as among Shia. And Shia also focus on Jafari. And Jafari comes from the name of the 6 Imam, and they also follow their Imams that offspring as prophet, as well as that Sunni groups also, their name is coming from the founder of that madhab or that school of thought. For example, Imam Shafi created the Shafi, school, or the same as others. So please go to the next slide. And yes, so in here we see the importance of the interpretation. So depends on that which aspects of those sources they focus, we have different interpretation. And the Quran says something, but the way that they have riyadh or they interpret to other aspects can be totally different and cause that we have a diversification among them. It is why that through centuries, maybe their understanding, their implication can vary from one madhab to other madhab, from one school of thought to the other school. For example, if we have the Ar-Rajal Qawwamuna 'ala Nisa, and they can expand it to all other aspects of family relationship. Next slide, please. Yeah. After the role of interpretation, we can see, not the Canadian laws, before that, please. Yeah. In Muslim community, there is no problem that because gradually it is established in different countries among Muslims. So the authority has this power to enforce the legal rights over the family rights. Although the women and all other the Muslims, they are free to choose their madhab or their school of thought, but when there is a dispute, they have to refer to the authority in the country. So in Muslim countries, they practice differently, they impose their own regulation. But when we move to a non-Muslim country, such as Canada, definitely it doesn't work. And if there is any dispute or disagreement, we have to refer to what is Canadian family law. It's why that for us, for our next generation, it's really important that we know what is this information comes and what's the reason behind that. And for example, if someone married here and go back to the country and again married someone else, and it's kind of biogamy or polygamy, what the Canadian law says about its inheritance, about the custody, and all those issues. So it is why that CCMW strongly believe that this knowledge sharing workshop really needs for Muslim community to expand their knowledge about Canadian family law. Thank you. And I hope that you enjoyed the rest of the workshop.
Zara, thanks so much for that great overview about Muslim law. I think, so the main takeaways, if we can just go back to the previous slide, is that in the Muslim community believes there is no central authority with the right to formulate legal and ethical doctrines for everyone, and Muslim women are under no obligation to follow the legal opinion of any particular school of thought, let alone any specific jurists in matters pertaining to family law. And thanks, Zara, for giving a detailed
yeah, and I should add that because of this diversification is completely pluralistic. So we have to know this pluralistic cannot apply in other non-Muslim countries, and even within the certain countries as Muslim countries, maybe there are the variety of practices.
Okay, great. So now we're going to move on to an overview of Canadian law, which will be covered by Soumia. So Soumia, I'll pass it on to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. So whenever I have clients approach me, I think the first thing they always say to me is they have no idea where to start. In other words, they really don't understand how the Canadian legal system works. So my presentation is really about giving you a brief, and I mean a very brief, introduction to how the Canadian legal system works when it comes to family law. To begin, the Canadian system is a public system with laws and systems in place that are intended to ensure equality and especially women's equality rights. So under this system, laws are open to public review and scrutiny, and the court decisions are a matter of public record, and these court decisions can be appealed to higher courts. So when we begin a process, let's say if a person and their spouse can't agree on how to settle issues between themselves, they can go to court to ask a judge to decide for them. So the Canadian courts use a common law legal system. In Quebec, they use civil law, but I'll focus on common law because Ontario uses common law. This means that judges make decisions by looking at both statutes, which is legislation, and case law, which is written decisions by other judges. The first thing that guides the family law is really based on statutes, such as the Family Law Act. And there's many different laws. The Family Law Act is not the only act, but it's one of the main ones that guides how family law is to be decided. But there's also different matters for different jurisdictions. So family matters are governed by both federal jurisdictions and provincial jurisdictions. Matters like marriage, divorce, equalization, those fall under federal jurisdiction, and they're governed by the Divorce Act. And others, such as custody, child support, spousal support, are provincial, and they're governed by other forms of legislation, such as the Family Law Act or the Children's Law Reform Act. Case law, or as I mentioned before, court decisions, further address the issues of women's rights. So these public court decisions, they're required to conform with other pieces of legislation, such as the Canadian Charter of Freedoms or some international laws that are made. And as I mentioned before, if there's any issues, these decisions can be appealed to higher courts to receive a judgment from the Court of Appeal or an even higher court, such as the Supreme Court of Canada. Both of these documents that are mentioned here, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, they address the issues of women's rights and provide some protection and equality for women. There's nothing that prohibits individuals from entering into domestic contracts between themselves. In fact, the law says individuals can contract and come into an agreement between themselves. So if two individuals decide to divide their assets or to split on some sort of religious grounds and religious agreements between themselves, if there is an issue and they decide to appeal that issue, it's really the government, the Canadian laws that will apply. And certain decisions that are made based on religion may not be upheld in Canadian courts. If we could go to the next slide. The biggest issue in Canadian law is really the access to justice. If we could just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So everybody everybody can have access to a lawyer, but not everybody can afford a lawyer. And so for individuals that cannot afford a lawyer, there is legal aid available if they qualify and are eligible financially for that, and they can receive the assistance of a free government lawyer who can assist them through the legal process. Sometimes it may be too expensive to pursue litigation and go through the entire court process. And so there are different avenues to resolve conflicts between people. One of them is private dispute resolution, or what we can also call as mediation. So many people want to resolve their issues out of court, and so they use the assistance of mediators or family members, and they try to come to an agreement between themselves. However, if there is an unequal balance of power between two people, such as if there's a situation where there's domestic violence involved, private mediation may not really reflect the best interests of that individual because they're on an uneven negotiating ground. Okay, and as I mentioned, even if you come to a private agreement between themselves, including religious laws, these may not be protected when you go to court. You can't agree to follow certain things if when you go to court, they don't reflect the best interests of the children, for example. Okay, so I guess that's a very brief overview of Canadian law, and I think the best way to get a more nuanced understanding of the law is to kind of go through a fact scenario. So we'll go into now the practical component of our workshop.
Okay, thanks a lot, Soumia, for that overview of Canadian law. And as you mentioned, Soumia, we're going to be going to the practical aspect now. So if we can, so what we'll do is that we're actually going to be sharing a 5 to 6 minute video, and then we're going to take about a 5-6 minute break to allow you to absorb the information and take any kind of notes about the scenario that's depicted in the video. And then after that, I'll be posing some questions to you related to the scenario. And yeah, so let's play the video now.
Yusuf and Aisha were married in Malaysia in 2002. Their marriage was arranged and they did not know each other very well. They were married in an Islamic ceremony and agreed on a mahr amount of $10,000, with $5,000 to be paid immediately and the remainder deferred. The couple's first daughter, Maha, was born in Malaysia. They moved to Canada when she was 2 years old. Since then, they have lived in Quebec and Alberta. They moved to Ontario in July 2018. Their other 2 children were born in Canada, their son Rehan and their youngest daughter Hannah. Their marriage has been very difficult since they moved to the country. Yusuf does not understand or accept the rights that women in Canada have, and Aisha would like more independence and freedom. Yusuf makes good money working as an engineer. Aisha has been at home with the kids, but would like to go to work, now that their children are in school full-time. Yusuf does not want Aisha to work and has become even more controlling of her. They live in a house that is registered in his name alone, and all the bank accounts are in just his name. He provides Aisha with a monthly allowance. While Aisha is the primary parent of the household, Yusuf is the disciplinarian, and he can be quite strict. He uses corporal punishment with the children, which Aisha does not agree with. There are also many tensions between Aisha and Yusuf about their 15-year-old daughter, Maha. She wants to go out with her friends and go to parties, but her father will not permit this. He also wants Maha to dress more modestly, but she wants to dress just like her friends. Yusuf recently returned from a trip to visit his family in Malaysia. He told Aisha he married another woman while he was there, and that she will be coming to live with them shortly. Aisha is very shocked and concerned about what this will do to her status as Yusuf's first wife. Since getting home, Yusuf has talked repeatedly about taking Maha to Malaysia to marry his cousin's son. He says this would be very good for the financial situations of both families. Also, if Maha were married and living in Malaysia, he would not have to worry about her getting into trouble with boys here in Canada. Aisha is opposed to this and is thinking about leaving Yusuf to protect her daughter. But she wants to know what her rights and responsibilities would be, and whether she would have enough money to support herself and the children. One day, Aisha receives the shocking news that Yusuf has suddenly died at work. Neither Yusuf nor Aisha has a will. Aisha knows very little about the family's financial situation. She knows there's a lot of jewelry in a safe in Yusuf's home office, but she does not know the combination to get into it. She doesn't know where they bank, how much money is in their accounts, or how much money they owe on the house. Yusuf mentioned a few years ago that he inherited several $100,000 when his father died, but Aisha does not know what he's done with this money.
Sorry, just Zainab, I think that there's still a bit left of the video, so I think let's see if we can get that back up. Okay, great. So thanks for playing the video, Zainab. We're also going to be putting up the scenario on a slide, and I'm also going to be reading out a disclaimer. So if we can go back to, if we can go to the next slide with the scenario, please, Zainab.
Yes, just a second.
Okay, thanks. Okay, perfect. So thanks for taking the time to watch that video. You'll be able to see that before we show you the scenario again, so you'll have a chance to absorb the information. I'm just going to read out a quick disclaimer about this video that you've just seen. So the scenario script and scenario video are owned by the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, CCMW, and cannot be recorded, reproduced, or distributed. The scenario is completely fictional with the sole purpose of anchoring participants in interactive discussions to engage with workshop materials. The CCMW is vigilant about racial, gender, and religious stereotypes used against and within Muslim communities, and strictly disavows the scenario script that video to be used to perpetuate the very stereotypes we strive against. For this reason, both the scenario script and scenario video are prohibited from being accessed beyond the scope of this workshop. Okay, great. So if we can just go to the next slide, Zainab. So we're going to take a 5 to 6 minute break now, and you'll see that on the screen, the scenario is there with all the information that was also in the video. So if you can just take a few minutes to digest that content, and we'll resume the workshop in about 5-6 minutes. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, that works for me. Thank you.
Okay. Zainab, we're actually going to be unmuting everyone for the Q&A part, which is to come shortly. So if we can just do that now, and if anyone wants to express any kind of questions around clarity or anything like that, they can feel free to do that as well.
हाँ ठीक है ठीक है ओके मैं बाद में कॉल करूँगी
Liza, I have a question. Are you going to share the rest of the scenario on the next screen?
Yeah, so we're just taking a break to get the basic scenario, and we're going to go and ask questions related to each part. So we can actually move on to that if people are ready. Zainab, did you want to just go to the next slide just to show the question that we'll be asking across this for the first part of the first area? Okay. So, hi everyone. Hope you've had a chance to review the scenario. If you need us to go back to it at any point, please just feel free to express that in the chat. So we'll actually start off by asking questions related to one of the 6 areas, marriage and divorce. And if everyone's ready, we can get started on the questions. And we'd really like this part to be very interactive, so your participation is greatly valued. And you'll be able to ask questions by sending a message through the chat, either to everyone, if you're comfortable with everyone seeing the question, or privately to the host. And we'll then read it out, and Soumia will be answering each of the questions. Okay, so the first question related to the scenario is related to marriage and divorce, and it is Yusuf and Aisha's marriage legal in Canada? So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I guess we can make this interactive. If you think yes, right, type 1 in the chat. If you think no, type 2 in the chat.
Okay, so great. I see one.
All right, does anybody think that their marriage will not be legal in Canada?
That's a really good question. I don't know, like, if it is legal or not legal, because a lot of immigrants that come into Canada. So I don't know, like, if they have married outside of Canada, like, how does that really work out here? So that's something that I don't know, like, if they have to go through the legal process to do it.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. And I think, so was it Shanza? Did I say your name right, Shanza?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so great. So I think that's a really good point that Shanza raised, is that if people marry abroad, does that necessarily make their marriage legal in Canada? And the answer to that is really, it depends. It depends whether in the jurisdiction where they got married in a way that would be recognized if the marriage was conducted in Canada. So for example, if both of the individuals were above the age of 18, there's a little bit of an echo. Sorry, if everybody could just mute their mic. Sorry, I was getting a lot of feedback. So it really depends. So if the individuals were above the age of 18 and they both consented to the marriage abroad, the marriage could be legally recognized here, and they can just file to have the marriage recognized here, or it could just be legally recognized without going through the formal procedure, just by virtue of them being married somewhere else. But if, for example, if the individuals were married in another country, but they violate one of the requirements of Canadian law. So, for example, if they were under a certain age, they were minors, or if the marriage was forced, the marriage may not technically be recognized in Canada. So we can go on to the next question. If there's any comments about that, please let me know.
Yeah, so Shanta, if you need any more clarity around that, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so the next question is, would Maha be able to get married legally in Canada? So feel free again to, if you feel the answer is yes, feel free to type 1, or 2 if you don't think that she'd be able to get married legally in Canada, or if anyone wants to participate by simply unmuting themselves and asking the question similar to what Shanza did, feel free as well.
Okay, so just remember in the scenario, Maha is 15 years old. So would Maha be able to get married at the age of 15?
Okay, so I see a comment from Farida. As she's underage, no. So a lot of people are saying no. Rahmat Afzal is saying no. We have CCM, yeah, so we're getting a lot of no's.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, people underage could get married, but the limit is 16 years old. So you can get married at the age of 16 years old if your parents consent to that marriage. But at 15, she's way too young to consent to that marriage. So it actually probably is a criminal offense just to get married to a 15-year-old,
Okay.
just because it's below the age of consent.
Okay, great. So if anyone has any additional questions they'd like to ask with respect to that, feel free to do so now. Otherwise, we'll be moving on now to the third question in this category. Okay, so if Aisha wanted a divorce, could she apply for one? So again, yes for 1, no for 2. And if you'd like to participate by unmuting yourself and speaking, feel free to do so as well.
Okay, so somebody said no. Why couldn't she? If you could just, you can unmute yourself and let me know what your train of thought is.
We're also getting a 1 as well, which is that yes. So it's kind of, we're seeing some splitting. So some people are saying, no, she cannot get a divorce, and others are saying yes. So if anyone would like to elaborate, feel free to do so by speaking as well.
Yeah, so do you want to let me know why you thought no? Because that would help me answer the question a lot more. Okay, no pressure. Anybody? Sorry, did I hear something? You can type in the chat as well. You don't have to unmute yourself and speak. Okay, from the individuals that said yes, why do you think so?
Hi, I think this is Shanta again.
Yep.
Again, I'm just saying that the yes, because if it is recognized here, according to what you mentioned earlier, that if she was at the age of that is similar to that in Canadian law, and for the age of consent, and if she was that, and even so, then she could file for divorce here in Canada, and no, like if she was not fulfilling any of those requirements, or at least meeting those basic standards.
Okay, so I'll elaborate on that. So filing for a divorce, the only real requirement is whether Canada has jurisdiction over that. So, I mean, there's other requirements, but the main requirement is, does Canada have the jurisdiction to issue a divorce for a marriage that occurred abroad? And the answer to that is to look at where the parties lived for the last year before the divorce was applied. So in our scenario, the individuals moved to Canada when their daughter was 2 years old. So it doesn't really say the exact year, but we know that they lived in Ontario since July 2018. So since July of 2018, they've lived in Canada in Ontario for at least over 1 year, for at least over 12 months. Therefore, Ontario has the jurisdiction to deal with the parties' divorce. Ontario recognizes that. So if one of the parties went and applied for a divorce in Malaysia, the other party could challenge Malaysia's jurisdiction and say, actually, Ontario has the jurisdiction to deal with this divorce. Okay. The other thing that we can, I want to address with this question is, you don't need a reason to apply for a divorce. Okay. Canada has what's called a no-fault divorce system. If tomorrow you want to get divorced because you don't have a reason, you just don't want to be with this person, you don't need to justify to the courts why you want to leave that person. Okay, so it's different than the Islamic law regarding women applying for divorce. In Canada, you don't need a reason. You don't need to say that your partner has been abusing you. You don't need to say that your partner is not contributing financially, etc. You don't need any reason. You can just say, I want a divorce, and the court will address that. And the court needs to address the other issues that are in stake. So child support, child custody, they need to deal with the equalization of the assets, and then the divorce will be granted. But you don't need a mistake or a fault or a reason to apply for a divorce in Canada.
Okay, and that's great, Soumia. Thanks for elaborating on that. We're also seeing some other comments from in the chat section. So someone is saying, Rahmat is saying, he is physically and mentally abusing the family. Also, he got married again in Malaysia. So can you explain how that context might fit into the answer as well? And also, we're getting a question here about what is the age line in Canada for girls and boys as well?
What do you mean by age line?
Did the person who asked that question, can you please clarify what you mean by that? But we should first answer the other one about...
yeah, it's me, Vaisa. Yeah, exactly. I asked about the age for marriage, the age of marriage for boys and girls, and what's the line and for both gender. Yeah.
So it's the same. There's no difference in Canada between the genders. It's 18 years old to get married, but you can get married at before if you're 16 or 17 if you have your parents' consent.
Thank you.
No problem. And the other comment that was brought up, he's physically and mentally abusing the family. Also, he got married again. So the second marriage won't be legally recognized in Canada because he's already legally married to somebody in Canada. And the issue about physical and mental abuse, that could speed up the time requirement for obtaining a divorce. So usually there is a minimum of 12. Sorry, there's just somebody speaking in the background. If you could just mute yourself. There's usually a 12-month separation period that is required before a divorce can be issued. But if you can show that there was infidelity in the marriage or there was extreme physical and mental abuse, you can ask for an expedited divorce where you don't need the 12-month requirement. That said, it may not be practical to try to ask for an expedited divorce because there may be so many other issues you need to deal with, such as child custody and spousal support and all of that. And physical and mental abuse does play a part in a judge's decision towards making a custody decision.
Okay, great. So I think for the next question, where would she apply to get a divorce? What reasons would she have to provide? I know that you've sort of touched upon this already, but if you can just elaborate on that a bit, Soumia, and if anyone has any thoughts on that, feel free to speak up as well.
Yeah, so there's two court levels that she could try to apply to. So there is the Ontario Court of Justice, and then there's the Superior Court of Justice. So as I mentioned in my introduction, only so divorce, marriage and divorce really falls under the federal jurisdiction. So she would have to bring her application before the Ontario Superior Court of Justice to get a divorce. And as I mentioned, she doesn't need to provide any reasons, but if she wishes to, she could. But, she could just say, we were married on this date, we separated on this date, we haven't been together for 12 months, and I'm seeking a divorce. But on top of that, she should also make an application for the rest of the matters, so, such as child custody, child support, spousal support, equalization, etc.
Great. And Soumia, you also mentioned that in terms of the second part of that question, what reasons? You mentioned that no reason has to really be provided, right?
No, you don't need, it's a no-fault divorce system.
Okay, great. So let's move on now to the next section. Zainab, if you can go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to be covering the section on marriage and polygamy. So I'm going to read out a new piece of information related to the scenario, and then we'll go on to those questions. So Yusuf recently returned from a trip to visit his family in Malaysia. He told Aisha that he married another woman while he was there and that she will be coming to live with them shortly. Aisha is very upset and concerned about what this will do to her status as Yusuf's first wife. So the questions that we have are, one, is polygamy legal in Canada? So what are your thoughts on that? Please type in 1 for yes, it's legal in Canada, and no, it is illegal in Canada. And feel free to speak up again if you have any thoughts or if you'd like to ask any questions related to this. So no so far that it's illegal. Does anyone else have any other?
I think that's a pretty straightforward question. I don't think anybody doesn't, most people know this,
Right.
That polygamy is illegal in Canada. And many of you might be, questioning why we're asking this question. And the reality is this affects so many women, especially in the Muslim community. You may not see it in front of you. It may not be so widespread, but as a professional in the field, I can let you know that I've been approached about this issue so many different times that it's actually very common. It's just very hidden. Okay. And this is why it was important for us to bring this topic into such a workshop, because it's more common than you think.
I think it makes a lot of sense, just kind of situating it into the context. Because yes, it seems very obvious, but I think that, I loved how you just situated that into the context of what's happening in Canada behind the scenes. So I think that's a pretty straightforward question. Like you said, I think most people are saying number 2, it's illegal. So let's go on to the next question. Would Aisha lose any of her rights because Yusuf has married another woman? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what people think, what protections Aisha may lose because of that.
So I'm seeing a poll in response to that question. Any others? Anyone else have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll just expand and elaborate on this question a little bit. So married spouses in Canada have special rights and protections. The married spouse, the legally married spouse, has rights to property division upon the breakdown of a marriage. Okay, so that means the individuals calculate their net family properties, which means they calculate what they are worth, and they calculate what the spouse is worth, and whatever spouse is leaving the marriage with less assets than the other spouse would have to give them 1/2 the difference of their net family property to the spouse. Okay, and spouses have the right to property, right? The right to divide pension, to divide the matrimonial home, etc., etc. The other woman, or the woman he married abroad, although her marriage is not legally recognized, that woman, if he's living with her, she may have what's called common law spouse rights. Okay, and common law spouses don't have the right to property, but they do have some remedies under the common law to have access to some sort of financial benefit. Okay, they have what's called a joint venture. They can seek some compensation if they engage in a joint venture with their spouse, and this is more complex. But let's say, you know, he lives in a property with the other woman, it's in his name, and that woman is helping him towards paying down the mortgage. She may have access to that property as a joint venture, even though he's legally married to somebody else. The other way, I wouldn't say Aisha is losing her rights, but because he is in a relationship with somebody else, he may have, you know, support rights to the other person as well. So if he has children with the other spouse, if the other spouse is dependent on him, it may affect his income or his ability to support Aisha post-separation, and it may affect the amount she would be entitled to support. Okay, so those are the important considerations. She doesn't lose any of her legal rights, but they may be compromised.
Okay, so that's very interesting and a very nuanced kind of answer to that. And I'm also seeing another comment, no, because second marriage is not legal in Canada. And I think you've already touched upon this. So it may actually detract from potential things that Aisha could receive because the acknowledgement of some of the live-in rights, right? That the other person.
Yes.
Okay.
Even if, just to clarify on that, even if somebody is living with an individual and they are not married, there is still some rights and obligations that the parties have to each other as common law spouses, and especially if they have children together. So if they live together for a number of years, some rights may start to appear between each other. Okay, so Canada recognizes non-marital relationships as valid common law relationships, whereas in some Muslim countries, those may not be recognized.
Okay, great. So if anyone else has any other questions related to that, feel free to type them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll be moving on now to the next part.
I have a question in regards to,
Sure.
so somebody that is married under the Islamic law, right? So just like in Aisha's case, that Yusuf married somebody in nikah in Malaysia, and would that person have the right to come to Canada, like apply for immigration or anything like that, or that's something because they were not legally married and may not have that kind of access or anything like that?
Well, it depends how they framed their application, right? So I'm assuming in this scenario that Aisha and Yusuf applied as a couple. Otherwise, I'm not sure how they would have immigrated together.
Go back all the way, like how they immigrated to Canada, because, or if they are a Canadian citizen, for example. And so let's say Yusuf is a Canadian citizen and he has married somebody in this situation. Would that wife from Malaysia, even though Aisha is in Canada and is a Canadian citizen and legally married, would the other person still be able to, under common law kind of situation?
Like, would he be able to sponsor her?
Yeah, or she could just apply for that under exactly, yeah.
So I'm not an immigration lawyer, but if he's legally married to somebody else, it would be very hard, I believe, for him to say he's sponsoring another spouse. I don't think that would be allowed, but I'm not an immigration lawyer.
Right. So what is a joint venture? Like it's like something that's probably very complicated, right? Like what you just said, like then they still would have rights in Canada to his
So,
property.
so in this scenario, I'm assuming that joint venture means, let's say you live together with somebody, you have children together, you invest in a property together, but the property is only under the husband's name, let's say, but she's paying towards the mortgage, she's raising the kids, they live together for 10 years, and suddenly they call it quits, but they were never legally married. What are her common law rights? So she can seek to get something out of that property because she wants to establish that this was actually a joint venture. It was like a joint business thing they took together. Okay, because she can't claim for equalization under the law because she's not married, but she can seek other common law principles that are found through case law where judges are trying to remedy a wrong through principles.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting discussion. I'm also seeing other questions now about this topic. So someone is asking, Farida is asking, what if he wrote in his will to give example property to the second wife? How would that play into it?
Right. So I think we will be addressing some inheritance questions a little bit later on. But I will address it now if that's okay with everybody.
For sure.
Yeah. So wills in Canada, you're pretty much free to do to wish whatever you want to in your will, right? But you spouses have the right to elect on how they inherit from your will. So Aisha can exercise the choice to take the first $200,000 from his will, or she can choose to take an equalization payment from his will. So she still would not be as a legal spouse if she's not separated from him and she continues to be his legal spouse on the date of his death. She can still make those applications if he decides to will everything to his wife. And secondly, let's say they have some children together here. His dependents can also challenge that will if the will does not leave room for them to continue to have a share of that will so that they can survive, right? So they can challenge the will on the basis that they are dependents and that something from the will must be left for them. Okay, so if he leaves a will that he's leaving everything to his second wife, it's most likely going to be challenged.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, so now I'm going to read out a new piece of information related to the scenario. Actually, before we move on, there's another comment here. I think in terms of common law rights, dependents of the province they live, the same marriage rights applied over to them. So can the person who wrote that just elaborate what they mean? Okay, if not, we'll just go on to the next section. Okay, so we're going on to the next section, custody and child support. So the new information is, since getting home, Yusuf has talked repeatedly about taking Maha to Malaysia to marry the son of his cousin. He says this would be very good for the financial situation of both families. As well, if Maha were married and living in Malaysia, they would not have to worry about her getting into trouble with boys in Canada. Aisha is opposed to this and is thinking about leaving Yusuf to protect Maha, but she wants to know what her rights and responsibilities would be and whether she would have enough money to support herself and the children. So the first question is, under Canadian family law, how would a court decide who should get custody? So any thoughts on that? Feel free to type it in the chat or speak into your mic as well.
Okay, so I mean, I'll wait a little bit for some of the comments. But before I guess I'll read out some of the comments that some individuals may write, I kind of want to clarify on what custody means and what access means. a lot of clients of mine, when they come to my office, they're sitting there talking about, he wants 50% custody of the kids, and I don't want him to have 50% custody. And what they really mean is access. Okay? Custody means decision making over the children. It means having the decision power over medical decisions, over educational decisions, and over religious decisions. Okay? That's what custody means. Access means the physical time, the parenting time spent with the child. So usually what most parents fight about is access. Custody, most parents may have the same views on how to raise their children. However, in situations where the parents really cannot agree, or they're very acrimonious, or they're really on completely different on different wavelengths as to how to raise the kids, that's where the issue of custody comes in. Okay, when the parents can't agree, when the parents have completely different beliefs or views on how to raise the children, like for example, education, which school to put your kids in. A parent may say, I want to put my kids in private school. A parent might say, I want to put my kids in French school. The other parent might say, I want to put my kids in religious or Islamic school. So if the parents really can't agree and there's a lot of heat there, a lot of tension, or there's a lot of animosity between the parents, then the custody fights begin, or medical decisions of the children. How the courts decide on custody is multifaceted. There's so many different factors that the courts consider, and I can't obviously list them all, but they really look at, who's been the primary caregiver to the child, who has been the main decision maker, how is the relationship between the parents. They look at whether there's a history of abuse or intimidation between the parents, and they really look at the best interests of the children. Who do the children, who are the children most accustomed to, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many different factors that the courts look at. For access, though, parents may want to decide that between themselves, but I think that is the huge point of contention, is they usually can't agree on a parenting schedule, and that is usually decided through the best interest of the children and who's been the primary caregiver of the child.
So I have a question. Sorry, I'm not sure if you're ready to have speakers.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So just because I did join a little late, and I'm not too sure of Maha's. How old is Maha in this situation?
She's 15.
So I believe there is in this particular case, because they're talking about getting her married overseas, there is that first of all, there's rights to protect the children under the Canadian law, I believe, against forced marriages and things like that. And based on that, if her mother was to contend that in court, wouldn't her mother be more, I guess, wouldn't she have a better chance at the custody of the child, because the interest of this child, she's underage, they're talking about marriages, it's not something that the Canadian law encourages, and they do have rights for children there, give that custody to the mother in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say for sure how a judge would decide, but I would hope that a judge would look into this and see that the father is not really making a decision that's in the best interest of his child, right? Getting an underage girl married abroad when she's grown up her whole life in Canada, it may not be a wise decision, right? And this, I think, would definitely play in the favor of the mother. But again, there's the whole issue of whether the father would be even allowed to take Maha out of the country, because as the mother, she could apply to prohibit the father from traveling with a child abroad.
Right. And isn't Maha also able to under that, I don't know what it is, I've heard about it, because there's been lots of cases where parents kind of force their kids to go overseas and get married, that the child, not of actual child, but the children of parents that are of a certain age are able to actually challenge them and I think bring it to court even.
Yeah, I mean, the mother could apply for the daughter to have her own lawyer. It's through the Office of the Children's Lawyer. And she's 15. She could easily voice her opinions to the court, and the judge will definitely consider the children's wishes, especially children over 12. Their wishes are considered by the court. But again, it's a decision of the mother to decide whether she wants to involve her daughter in the court system or not. But from a third-party point of view, I'm pretty sure a judge will oppose that.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on that? Because otherwise we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so the next question is, what would Aisha be able to do if Yusuf took Maha to Malaysia without her consent? Anyone want to have any thoughts on that?
Could she file like a missing child report or something like that in a way too? Because this child, well, never mind.
No, but that's a good question. I think, Soumia, if you can elaborate on that, I think it is an thought.
It's good to also think about what would your gut feeling tell you to do. So we call these kind of child abduction cases, right? It happens very often where parents just take the child out of the jurisdiction. So it's a tough situation she's in because, you know, as a lawyer, I would have said you should have prevented him from taking her in the first place, right? Because once the other parent takes the child, it's going to be a long, drawn-out legal battle, right? To get the child back. Certain countries, they have agreements with Canada, right? So we call these agreements under the Hague Convention, and it's international treaties that different countries sign on to, where they agree that they will help the other country in enforcing custody and family orders, right? So if there is a jurisdiction order from Ontario that says this child belongs in Canada and must be returned to Canada, a country abroad that's a signatory to the Hague Convention would cooperate. So their police would help locate that individual, apprehend them, and have the child returned to the jurisdiction. Now, it sounds kind of simple in theory, but there's many different countries that are not signatory to the Hague Convention, okay? So if a child is taken to a particular country, and I can think of some off the top of my head, but I don't want to say, but I'm assuming, let's say, I don't know if China is a signatory, but let's say China is not. If a child is taken there, it may be very difficult to get that child back because you just don't have the cooperation of that country. But let's say a child is taken to the United States. The United States has a very good relationship with Canada when it comes to these things. And the United States police, or whatever that state police, will actually cooperate in bringing that child back. But if a child is taken to a country that's not a signatory to the Hague Convention, you then need to go to that country. You need to start litigation in that country, hopefully get an order from a judge from that country to then have your child returned. But that could take years for them to have the child returned. So is Malaysia a signatory to the Hague Convention? I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. I don't know off the top of my head, but let's assume it is. You know, maybe the Malaysian police force will cooperate with an order from it should have to get an order from the Ontario court to have the child returned. And if Malaysia is not, she'd have to get help from a lawyer in Malaysia to see how she can have her child returned to Ontario.
Okay, great. So it really depends on which country and the rules and the connection between Canada and that country's laws as well.
Yeah, okay. And whether they can even locate the child, right?
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of technicalities involved too. Okay, so yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So if Aisha and Yusuf are, they didn't start any custody processes before he took her to Malaysia without her consent, it's going to be challenging to essentially get her back.
Can be, and it can take time, right? Because the first thing I would say is, you know, she should reach out to Yusuf and say, bring her back immediately, or I'll be starting legal proceedings, like send him a letter from a lawyer that he's abducted the child. She should make a a police report here. So that way, if he ever returns to the country, he may be apprehended, et cetera, right?
Mhm.
But
Can I ask, Soumia, can I ask a question? It's Nuzhat. I thought that a parent needs the consent of the other parent to take a child out of the country anyway. So if Yusuf takes Maha without the consent of Aisha, shouldn't that sort of send red flags to the that he's
yeah,
taking the child without the consent of the other parent?
yeah, the reality is the border security should ask for a consent letter to travel,
They
but
don't.
in reality, they never do, right? Unless
I-
they sadly stereotype individuals, and they'll only ask certain individuals, right? But he could easily say, "Oh, we're just taking a trip with my daughter. She looks 15. She doesn't like unless she alerts the security and says, I don't want to go."
Mhm.
It may not raise any red flags to border security, and they may not ask him that question, where's the mother's consent, right? Technically they should ask him for the mother's consent, but the sad reality is most often there's just too many travelers and they just don't ask.
Yeah, and I actually have a personal experience there where I was under, I think my brother and I were under 14, and we were actually traveling with our uncles, and we had a letter written up because we were aware of the situation. Like, you have to have travel permission from your parents. Neither parents were present, and no one asked.
Yeah. So like if he sneaks past the border, that she's gone. But the best thing to do, if what I tell my clients or in general, is if you sense that your partner is making threats to take the children and leave, is you need to get an order prohibiting that individual from leaving the country with those children.
How would they, like, what if they ask about, well, does she have her mother's consent? It's not a written letter, and they say, well, it's verbal consent. Like, how do you prove that? And is
Usually
that
what
even
border security will do is they usually stereotype. I don't want to make generalizations, but they may just believe you, or they may actually say, call her.
Mhm.
And they may call the mother and ask if she provided consent or not.
Okay.
Mm.
That's actually very interesting. So it is a large part of it is up to their discretion as well.
Yeah, they have a border security have huge discretion,
Yeah.
which is good and bad.
Yeah.
Good and bad.
Yeah, for sure. Good and bad, because it could potentially save somebody's life, but it could also create problems unnecessarily too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on then, unless anyone else has any other comments or thoughts on this. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're now moving on to questions related to property. So the first question is, under Canadian law, who would get the house? So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it would be Yusuf, Aisha? Like, how would that pan out?
Would it be the person whose name's primarily on the house? So, yeah, like if John or sorry, okay, if Yusuf, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting names. If Yusuf were the one who purchased the house and then she joined him later, and then they added on, legally the house is his, although he could compensate her 50% of whatever the value of the house could be. But in terms of like the physical house, would they, like, I'm assuming usually they get forced to sell and then split the cost, or like, they can decide, like, one person keeps the actual house and then compensates the amount.
Yeah, we're also hearing some similar comments related to a 50-50 split. So one person is saying 50-50 between the spouses. Other people are agreeing, and a lot of people in the chat are saying that, yes, it would be split in terms of value.
Those are really, really good guesses. So the first thing that the courts look at is, what is the designation of this home? Is this home a matrimonial home, right? Is it a home that the parties use to live in together? So their property that they live in, although it's in Yusuf's name, it's a matrimonial home, which means both spouses have equal rights to the possession of the home and equal rights to the to the value of the home. Okay, neither party can kick the other party out of the house. Neither party can change the locks. Neither party can tell the other person to leave and get their stuff out, or prohibit or make it impossible for the other person to access the home. And both parties get the benefits of the house, regardless of who invested into the house. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how that works, it's not just like a straightforward question that they sell the property, they split it 50-50, because they also have to take into account what are their other assets, what is their net worth, both of them. Okay, what assets did they come into the marriage with? What assets are they leaving the marriage with? What's the difference between that? And who's leaving the marriage on a higher ground? Okay, but the matrimonial home is a shared asset. Okay. Now, let's say, you know, in our scenario, Yusuf is very abusive, aggressive. He makes it a toxic environment in front of the children. Aisha could apply for what we call exclusive rights to possession of the home. Okay, so this is where she goes to the court and she says, it's a matrimonial home, but I want to be the only person that lives in it. Okay. And the court can make that order. Let's say if they find that it's impossible for the parties to live together and under that one roof, and take away the rights to the matrimonial home from one spouse. Okay, if that spouse is abusive or it's just impossible for them to both live in the matrimonial home together. Now there is some compensation when that happens, but I won't get into the details of that. But essentially, the property is shared.
Okay, so that's related. Sorry, Soumia, I also have a question around that. So that's related to if they cannot live in the same house together. But would the value of the property itself be split?
Yes.
Is that a separate? Okay, yeah.
Yes, but it may not. But the court might not order the sale of the house if the mom says, "I need the house because I need to take care of these young two children."
Right.
Feel that we have antibodies to COVID, and apparently there's been blood being sampled and researched, and it's like 2% immunity is what you would have.
Sorry. Okay. Well, that's a little science lesson. Okay, but that's okay. With regards to the matrimonial home, so let's say the children are living in that house. It may not be in the best interest of the children to have that house sold at the moment because maybe they go to school and they need housing and the mother can't afford any other housing and the father owes support anyway to the mother and the children. So the court may not order the house to be sold until 5 or 10 years, until the children are above 18. It may take some time to obtain an order like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions related to the first question, let's move on to the second one, which is related to mahar. Is the mahar legally enforceable in Canada?
Okay, so what do our participants think about that? So in just to remind everybody, in our scenario, they were married in an Islamic ceremony, agreed on a mahar of 10,000, with 5,000 to be paid immediately and the remainder deferred. So she's got about $10,000 that he still needs to pay her. Would that be enforced in Canada? Do the Canadian courts recognize mahars?
Do they go through like the arbitrary courts in this regard to religious divorces?
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of no.
Mm-hmm. So I think that Zainab, you brought up a really good point. I think, Soumia, if you could touch upon that, like, again, I know that we sort of covered it in the presentation, but religious courts and their role, if there is any in Canada, as it relates to things like recognizing something like mahar as well, if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so so as I mentioned, there's nothing that prohibits individuals from entering into contracts together. What makes a contract a valid, legally enforceable contract? It has to be signed, right? So if the mahar contract is signed by both of them in the presence of witnesses, it's a legally enforceable contract, okay? And most nikah certificates are signed. in the presence of witnesses, because your wali has to sign, your two witnesses have to sign, and the bride and groom have to sign. So if it's on the nikah certificate, $5,000 right now and $10,000 deferred upon divorce, and it's signed by everybody, everybody understood, nobody was forced into that marriage, and you bring that to a Canadian court, the Canadian court will recognize that and enforce that as a legally valid contract.
Right. The thing you said that was interesting, Soumia, is informed consent. How do you prove that? How does that?
Well, he knew he was getting married. He knew the terms of the marriage contract. It's not like he was mentally ill or that he was married against his will. So I think it would be, or that he had no idea. So for example, if the contract is written in Arabic, the mahar contract is written in Arabic and neither of them speak Arabic, how can you say that the parties knew what was written on that piece of paper, right? So there are some arguments somebody can raise, but when I tell my clients is, if you're going to sign a marriage contract, ensure that you understand what you're signing, right? And if you're trying to have your mahar solidified and be legally enforceable, sign it in the presence of witnesses, make sure the document is translated, make sure everybody is aware of the terms of the contract and agrees to the terms of the contract.
Soumia, this is Nuzhat again. So one of the things that we've heard women say to us when they are looking for help from us, from CCMW, they often find that the husband has taken away any legal documents. So for instance, they cannot find the nikah document or the marriage certificate. This is pretty common, and that deprives them of actually access to the mahar at dissolution of the marriage, and they really have no recourse because there's no document, a contract that is signed by both parties that they could take to the courts and say this is a domestic contract or a legal contract, because they don't have it because the husband has taken it away. This is very common. We do hear from quite often that this is the case.
Yeah, I do agree with you that it is a challenge. And at the end of the day, as a lawyer, what I would tell my client is it worth pursuing this avenue for you? How much is the mahar? How much will it cost in legal fees to have? Basically, what you'd have to do is bring those witnesses to testify, whoever was present at the nikah, and to get them to say, yes, we saw there was a paper there that was signed, and you'd have to show the courts that the husband is refusing to disclose that and it's in his possession. And then the judge will have to make a finding based off of who he believes or he or she believes is credible, right? If the judge believes you because you've testified that a piece of paper did exist, that it was signed, and the witnesses recall signing that piece of paper, and you recall signing that piece of paper, and the husband is refusing to provide that piece of paper, you may have a case. But if the mahar is like $5,000, and to get to that stage is going to cost you $20,000 in legal fees, it may not be worth to pursue that $5,000.
Right.
Which is sad, but that's why I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, access to justice is the biggest issue that we have. It's one of the biggest issues that we have with our legal system.
Soumia, hi, this is Zara again, Zara Hujati. Actually, as Nuzhat talks about the experience, I can brought up the experience from my own community as well, that for Iranian people, usually, when they sign the contract, it is the women's right to keep the contract first. So she always can refer to that. And the second thing, it is registered in an official office.
That's
so
great.
Even
right.
if anything that happened, because I exactly remember one of my relatives, she had challenges about those issues, and the guy took that document from her, and she could find their registration office, and she referred to there and got a copy of the contract, so she could follow it. So it means that, when we talk about the fair and Islamic, thought that they are evolving, if it can be part of the women's activity that they can get those rights, even from their own host countries, they live and they grow up. It's kind of, protect them from any further, movement that they go to other countries as well.
I think this is a really good point that you bring up, because a lot of imams here in Canada do nikah ceremonies, but they only prepare one nikah contract that is signed on the day of. So it may be a good idea to suggest to imams who are performing nikahs to prepare 2 copies, one for the bride and one for the groom. I think this is a very good recommendation that you've brought up.
And even if they have any office, official office, they can register that as well.
Yeah, there's no official office in Canada to register.
In here again, this committee again, in here they have to.
Well, can I just again ask something here? So if a marriage is performed here in Canada, it has to be registered, according to the provincial laws for registering marriages.
Yes.
However, that document that's registered is not the nikahnama, which may actually contain the reference to the mahar.
Exactly.
And I guess, as a Muslim community, or communities, we could, maybe suggest to provincial jurisdictions that the certificate of marriage for Muslims include the clauses related to the mahar right in the certificate, so that it is officially registered with the province or the territory, and the woman doesn't have to rely on adjust whether there's a second copy or whether she gets a copy or not. Anyway, something to think about, because
it's definitely something that would require some lobbying and some talking to your MPs and discussing this issue at a federal level.
Yep. Okay. Well, something else for CCMW to think about.
Definitely.
Yes.
It is a really good idea, but I strongly agree with Soumia that talked about the imam in here for even different madhab that they are practicing. Give to both sides, and also, if it's possible, have a kind of registration center, so it can be fixed as place, they can register like the Canadian. For example, for this community that I'm talking about, they have to, at the beginning, they have to go to Canadian registration, and following that, they can do the nikah and other things, and it will be registered, it will go to all other documents, even from back home, from here to back home. It's a good idea to follow.
Okay, great. I'm also noticing some other questions in the comment section. So someone is saying that if the mahar is arranged in Canada, yes, but if it was arranged in Malaysia, no. And another person is saying the courts would want proof as well. So if you can just quickly elaborate on that, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Yeah, I don't think it matters where the document was signed. If it's signed and you have that proof, you can get it legally.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next section. Zainab, if you can just go to the next slide. Okay, so we have some new information related to inheritance that I'll be reading out. So the new information is neither Yusuf nor Aisha has a will. Yusuf dies suddenly at work. Aisha knows very little about the family's financial situation. She knows there is a lot of jewelry in a safe in Yusuf's home office, but she does not know the combination to get into it. She does not know where they bank, how much money is in their accounts, or how much money they owe on the house. Yusuf told her a few years ago, when his father died, that he inherited several $100,000, but she does not know what he has done with this money. So the first question is, in Canada, what happens when someone dies without a will? So what are for the participants, what are your thoughts on this? So we can just give a little bit of time if people have any questions or thoughts on this question, and otherwise, Soumia, if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of, and there's so many individuals that don't know what happens if you pass away without a will, and many people will come and say, the government takes everything. So they a lot of people freak out and come and make a will and say, I don't want the government to take everything, but there's actually a regime in place for individuals who die without a will.
Right. Someone's actually commenting here. Falak is asking, the government deducts pending taxes first. How does that sort of play into it?
Right. So I think what Falak is referring to is when somebody dies without a will, we call that somebody dying intestate. Okay. The government takes their taxes, and that's true. The government always takes their taxes. The first things that happen when a person passes away from your estate, your funeral expenses are paid, your liabilities are paid, your taxes are paid, your estate tax is paid, and then whatever is remaining is divided according to a legislated set system. Okay, so the first $200,000 go to your spouse if you die without a will, and then the remaining is shared between your spouse and your children. Okay, so that's if you die without a will. It is kind of a downward linear pattern. Okay, and if you don't have any spouse or you only have children, it only goes to your children. And if you don't have any spouse or children, then it would go to grandchildren, and if not, then it would go to your parents. So there is a system in place if you die intestate, and it's only if there is nobody, absolutely nobody, then the government takes everything. Okay. So in this scenario, because Yusuf has Aisha and his children, the first $200,000 would go to Aisha, and then the remaining would be split between Aisha and the children equally.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's move on then to the next question. Would Yusuf's second wife have a legal right to claim a share of his estate? So I know that we touched upon this briefly earlier, but what are people's thoughts on that? Like, to what extent would the second wife have a legal right to claim a share of his estate? I'll give a few seconds for people to respond. And if anyone wants to use the mic to participate, feel free to as well.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before earlier in the presentation. In this, she would have to make a claim that she's a dependent on him to get a share to his estate. Somebody said if she's not here, she can't get anything, and I'm not sure if that's the case. She may retain a lawyer here who can act on her behalf, but she needs to claim that she's a dependent of his and that she was reliant on him financially and requires something of his estate, especially if she has children with him. She may qualify for that, and his children from another marriage, from another relationship, whether it was legal or not, they're still dependents on him.
Soumia, I have a question about the status of a second wife who might be considered common law. In some cases, there might be multiple wives, men think they can have 4. So let's say there's a wife number 3 and 4 living common law with this man. So what happened? I mean, how does the law treat those 3 women, who are supposedly living common law? And then what rights would they each have to his estate? Because, like you're saying, they would have to prove that they were dependent on him. But can you have more than one common law partner? Is that legal?
Can you have more than one common law partner? I mean, this is the thing. If somebody says that they had a dependent relationship with him, whether that marital relationship was legal or not, I don't think it affects the claim that they were dependent, especially if they have children with him. right? So let's say he has children with 4 different women. They could each claim that they were financially dependent on him in some way, right? Now, the way that we look at it is if his salary was, let's say, $50,000, how was he splitting his income really amongst 4 different women for them to actually be dependent on him, right?
Yes.
So there's a few considerations, whereas if he was a millionaire and all of these women were financially dependent on him, and they can show that they were, or that they received a specific allowance from him, or that they were receiving spousal support from him or whatnot, that they could make a claim from his estate.
Wow.
Whether they'll be successful, I don't know, but it'll be up for a judge to decide. And really, how much inheritance is there, right? Because if we're just talking about $10,000 of jewelry and $5,000 in a bank account, it may not be worth to make any claim, because his spouse would get the first $200,000 anyway, right?
Right.
But if the estate is bigger, that's when people litigate. When the estate is, a couple of $100,000 or whatnot.
Sure. I was just sort of asking hypothetically because you probably know this, that, we hear from women who have, like who might be the first wife or could be the third wife. And what happens in many cases is that if you're the second, third, or fourth wife, you don't actually know that you are, part of a polygynous marriage. And then you discover, well, he already has a wife. So you may or may not have any claim because, either he wasn't supporting you because he was, you were independent and you were living with the guy. I mean, there's so many, as we've said before, in a lot of these cases, the expression, it depends, really what dictates what happens after a dissolution of the relationship. But when that happens, when the wife just suddenly discovers that, what, she's not just the only wife. I mean, there are other wives, and the marriage may not have been registered here, or it may have been, and the man got married to her anyway. That wife in Saudi, and another one in Malaysia, and then, another in Pakistan. So it's very complicated. But I think, in our next project, maybe around legal education for Canadian Muslim women, we probably need to expand some of these questions because it can be complicated. But also, even in and children from these multiple partners, maybe we need to address some of these complex issues, in a way that can explain why it's really, really necessary for Canadian Muslim women, to have domestic contracts, to have documentation, to ensure that they have all of their paperwork, and absolutely, have a will. Because, I mean, lately I've been thinking, okay, I have to update my will because of COVID, and everyone should do that. When you have a new child, when you get married or you get divorced, absolutely essential for you to have a will. And if your husband or your partner doesn't have one, make sure he does too, because anything can happen. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I think it's to the issue.
And I'm Zara again, and Nezat, following your point, exactly, I know a lady here that she told me, and I invited her for this workshop, but I'm not sure that she attended or not. But unfortunately, she had the exact example that we have in this scenario. Her friend's husband married someone else in Somali, and the guy died, and that lady from that country claimed for his asset in here. And even this lady's children, they're supporting that lady from Somali. So this lady was totally confused, about all those things. So you are completely right that they are very complicated.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's, if anyone else has any other questions, thanks. I think that, yeah, this seems like a very nuanced, complex issue. Let's move on to the next, to the final slide, that the final section. So the final section is on domestic contracts. And the question is, if Aisha takes the children and leaves Yusuf, can she get financial assistance from him? So this is more about Aisha leaving Yusuf and how finances would work out in that way. So does anyone have any thoughts? So I guess one person is saying, yes, she can get financial assistance from him.
Depends on his income, his ability to provide.
Yeah, the confusion that I want to clarify is just because she chose to leave him doesn't mean she's not entitled to anything. Like I said, it's a no-fault divorce in Canada. So if she chooses to leave, he's got to start paying child support in relation to his income. So Aisha hasn't been able to work. She was completely dependent on him throughout the marriage. They've been married for a really long time, right? At least 20 years, I think, from the scenario since. Let me just scroll back up. Since 2002, so 18 years of marriage. She's definitely entitled to some sort of spousal support, depending on his income. And so it's just about doing the calculations and determining how much she would be entitled to. Right.
And we have another comment here that Farida's saying she can apply through the court system. So I guess it has, so what?
Yeah, she can do that. Or what most people do is they get into an agreement outside of court. You can do that through lawyers or through a mediator. And the calculations are relatively simple to do. You can even look them up online to determine the amount of support. And that way you don't need to go through the whole drawn out legal proceeding. You can simply come to an agreement out of court and draft a separation agreement and be on your way in a much more efficient and affordable way than going through litigation.
Okay, great. So I think we'll wrap up this section of the presentation now. And Zainab, if you can just go to the next slide. So before we close, I did want to go over some safety related matters for anyone that may be in a precarious situation. Just to reiterate, Canadian law provides some protection in terms of, so there are many forms of domestic violence that are so any forms of domestic violence are against the law in Canada, including assault, sexual assault, forcible confinement, threatening and criminal harassment and stalking. Women can call the police for help, and restraining and protection orders and exclusive possession orders are available through the family court system. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Zainab, if you can go to the next slide. And just wanted to now conclude and talk about next steps. So as you're aware, there is the Muslim and Canadian Family Law Comparative Primer that is available for reading that will give you more detail about everything that we've discussed today. So today we provided an overview of Muslim and Canadian family law and facilitated a discussion on Canadian family law through the use of a scenario that covered the 6 key areas. In terms of next steps, I mean, there are many next steps, but one of the key ones would be to explore specific family law issues in some detail. So I know that many of us had already talked about that there's a lot of scope to explore these issues in more detail and do some advocacy and lobbying around this too. If we can just go to the next slide. And if there are any additional questions or comments, the floor is open now to ask those questions. So we leave it open now for any additional questions or comments before we close. And I'd also, before we close, I'd also like to say that there is an evaluation that you'll notice in the chat, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill out the evaluation form. And you'll notice that it's just in the chat right now at SurveyMonkey. So please fill that out and share your thoughts on your thoughts on the workshop and how you think it went. And we really, really appreciate your time and your participation in this workshop, and would really love your feedback as well. So thank you so much for attending.
Question
Does that
for hi.
Okay. Yes.
I have a question. So let's say like when you're going through a Canadian divorce process, for example, and I think there was a mentioned that let's say the woman does not have any other means of supporting herself and the kids, and she's living in the matrimonial home. Then, but you want to get the divorce, for example, as well. And if that 12-month period that is has passed, or can you still be able to process the divorce? And if I think was it mentioned that you can still have the court say that you can't sell the house till like the kids, because that's the only place for them to live or something like that you mentioned. So could still be the divorce could get processed even if you still be living in the matrimonial home and not have it sold to get the equalization done like till a later date. And is that something that you get an agreement with the other party, or just the court can put that order and then still get a divorce, or till all these matters needs to be resolved, then you get the divorce?
Usually the courts will wait until at least there's an order for child support and the custody decisions, before granting the divorce, or at least equalization should be done before granting the divorce. And the reason is because there's limitation periods that kick in. And let's say, you're starting a divorce application, but you don't agree on everything else. The limitation starts from the date that you obtain the divorce. And so if you don't have an agreement 2 years after the divorce, the limitation period has expired, and it will be very hard to get equalization and everything else after a divorce. So it's unless there's a real rush to obtain a divorce, it may not be a wise decision to do so before you've got everything else in place.
Oh, so that's a better thing to like have it all sorted out and have it all done.
Yes, you need to tell the court that the children are being taken care of. Okay, that child support is being paid, and equalization has been agreed upon, and that the parties have basically agreed on the issues between themselves before a divorce is granted. But that said, if there is a reason that you would like to fast pace your divorce, you can speak to your lawyer and get advice on whether it's a good option for you, depending on the facts of your case.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for participating, Shanza. Sir, I'll just leave the floor open maybe for another 5 minutes, and then we can wrap up if anyone else has anything else they'd like to ask.
Assalamualaikum. I have a question.
Sure.
Sure.
Yes, it's regarding divorce in the case of domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So I know someone, she has a case going on. She filed a sexual assault case against her husband when she recently came to Canada, and her husband was abusing her. So she has been separated from her husband for more than 1 year, and she also has a restraining order against her husband. What would you suggest? Should she apply for a divorce now, or should she wait for her assault case to be sorted out first? And she is not in the condition to hire a lawyer, and the legal aid does not help out in cases of uncontested divorce. So what will be her options?
Okay, so they don't have any children together?
No children.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, if she needs help with uncontested divorce, there are some free resources for help. There is the Family Law Information Center.
Okay.
And they're really great for helping you fill out the forms and telling you the steps you need to follow. And so although they're not your lawyer for the proceeding, they can help you with the process of applying for an uncontested divorce.
Okay.
The other thing she can do is she can seek for the divorce fees to be waived if she doesn't have an income, right?
Yeah.
So there is an application you can make at the counter
Okay.
to ask the government to waive the fees, because the fees are about $632, I believe, to file for a divorce, and that's without a lawyer. With a lawyer, it could be over $1,000 to do that. So, she can ask for the government to basically not charge her that amount. So that's another possibility. I know that there's also a Muslim legal clinic that recently started. They're not operating every week or anything like that, but it's a good idea to reach out to them. Or she can also try to find a lawyer that can help her pro bono. I know access to justice, like I mentioned, is very difficult, but filing for a standard uncontested divorce, if you follow the steps, it's pretty straightforward.
So it's Nuzat here again. So you know that the CCMW now offers a legal services coordination. And depending on what the situation is, you can always contact us at legalservices@ccmw.com. If you go to our website, there's an intake form that you can fill in that takes down the details. And depending on your situation, we can either find you a lawyer for an initial consult with, for which they don't charge, but then, try and find legal aid for you, find resources in the community to support you. So I think it's a good idea to use that coordination function now within CCMW. We're going to have an official launch of that coordination service in the next few weeks, but we are already sort of live. So, we would encourage you to contact us through that legal services coordination initiative as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
really great.
Yes, thank you.
That's a really great service, because I find that, like I said, the first thing most of my clients say to me is they don't know where to start, right? And having some sort of guidance that's available to them for free is key, I think, to have access to justice for Muslim women in our community.
Of course. I'm also noticing another comment. Someone is asking if you could talk a little bit more about the court insisting on the father having access to the child when the child is physically sick, when he or she has to meet the father.
I think the question is, this is about access exchanges. And sometimes the parent will say the child is sick, so you can't see the child today, right? I think this is what the question is about. No. Okay, maybe clarify the question.
You can clarify, please. Sorry, the person who asked that question. Clarify.
This is me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had a client who had a young son, and the father was given the right to meet him in the mall. So the mother would take him to the mall, and this child absolutely hated going to meet his father. And the court kept insisting that she must take the son to meet the father, and he would get a stomach ache. He would start throwing up days before he knew that he had to go that weekend to meet his father. So in that, and she was told by the lawyer that it would help her if she showed due diligence taking the child to meet the father, but it wasn't very helpful to the child. I mean, subsequently, I believe the father has died, but at that point of time when she was having to force the child to go, he was really ill. He would react. He did not want to see his dad, but the court was insisting that, or the lawyer was insisting that you must make an effort to take the child, or else it would hamper your case, the outcome of your case.
Well, yeah, I'm not in a position to comment on a case, but that I don't know the facts fully to, but this is the thing, right? Court orders, they're not suggestions. If a judge made an order that she has to take the child every weekend to the mall, the judge made that order. It's not a suggestion, and court orders have to be followed because the judge considered all of these factors. and the judge still decided that the child should have access time with his father. So I'm not in a position to comment on a judge's decision that I haven't read or I haven't reviewed, but all she can do is go and bring that up to the justice, right? And the judge can then either change their decision, she can appeal the decision. There's many avenues to seek to review that decision. But if the judge made a finding, it's an order, and our orders have to be followed.
Thank you so much.
Right. And I think that, Soumia, that also touches upon the issue of precedence, right? So, and the importance of kind of following through with court orders, even if there are things that need to be addressed as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments, then I think we'll wrap up. Thanks again, everyone, for participating, and please do fill out that evaluation form that was sent in the chat. It was just sent again. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Okay, thank you, everybody.